I've been a council member. I was for 9 years and a mayor, and I've been part of various organizations, including Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and I'm going to spend most of my time talking about that. I've also been part of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District and Cities Association. I've worked on transportation initiatives, and I'm also been more recently Cupertino Rotary president and chair of its Climate Action Committee. So I want to talk about some of the things that local government has done here to move the needle on climate. And you may remember this picture from not so many years ago. This is what the Bay Bridge looks like under a enormous cloud of wildfire smoke. It's an eerie and surreal look at the future that will befall us with climate change. And fires will become more prevalent, droughts will become more prevalent, flooding at other times will become more prevalent. Our water supply will go down and so forth. So we are already having to adapt to climate change. We choose with the rest of the world how far we let that problem run before we actually get to carbon neutrality. And then, okay, we can think about how we then sequester to reverse the amount of carbon we have in the atmosphere. And of course, it's a global problem, but I and many of my colleagues serving in local government have been eager to do our part and more, right, and lead on climate. So if you look at the Bay Area greenhouse gas emissions to 2050, and you look at the breakdown of sources here, that you see transportation, stationary sources, energy supply, buildings, and so forth. And you see what happens if we do nothing. The do nothing scenario is at the top there, and the dotted line are what the objectives are if we take further action. So clearly, based on the baselines that we established in 1990 and 2015, we have a lot more steps that we must take if we are going to meet our goals. And if I drill down now to Silicon Valley as of 2018, this is the breakdown. And we looked at this in our region and we said, okay, transportation makes up around half of this. Buildings make up a third of this. Then there are other uses that we have. But we could actually make a material difference if we changed our energy supply to be essentially carbon-free. And then we worked to electrify everything. In other words, just as you might decide you're going to buy an EV instead of a gas-powered car, as we power the grid with electricity, we make choices around the country. It might be coal, it might be nuclear, it might be natural gas. That's the most common. And then we have renewables, right? So solar, wind, water, and so forth. And one of the vehicles for getting a clean power supply quickly that became evident to us is forming our own energy company, a public company that goes and contracts for clean energy sources and then supplies them to our communities from wherever the electricity is generated. So this is called community choice. And it's prevalent now in California and around the country, but this is actually very recent. The first CCA in California formed in 2010, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But the way this works is we procure the electricity, on behalf of all of our residents and on behalf of businesses. The transmission and distribution provider, in this case, where we live, it's Pacific Gas and Electric, delivers it to us locally and then all the way down to the customer level. PG&E for us provides the billing service as well as that transmission service. By state law, PG&E has to allow us to do this, and we are the provider of first choice. That is, customers could elect to get their electricity through PG&E, but they would, in our case, they'd be paying more. In the 6-7 years we've been in operation, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, which formed from this, has provided electricity that's been cleaner and less expensive at the same time. So no motivation. We're interested in having no motivation for customers to opt out. And our initial goal was this: could we actually compete? We didn't know this at the beginning. It wasn't clear to us. We figured a monopoly power company with its scale and size could beat us, but it turned out that they are inefficient enough that we could play the game and beat them, being more nimble and more motivated by things like clean energy than paying our CEO, say, $55 million. So that's what we did. And we said, it's one thing to clean up the power supply, but as you saw from that prior breakdown, we also have a substantial amount of gas that goes to heat buildings, to heat our water in our water heaters, and also to move our cars around. And so we won't be successful simply by removing carbon from the electricity supply. We've got to electrify those appliances in our home and our transportation, our vehicles and other things that are consuming fossil fuels. And that's the way then, by doing those things, changing the built environment, which are the buildings, okay, the mobility piece, which is, transportation, and changing the power supply. If we do all those things, then we can get to zero, right? And okay, there are a few smaller things to talk about there, but the big movers here are our buildings, our transportation, and our power supply. So that's what we set out to do. And as I mentioned, the first CCA in California formed in 2010. It was Marin Clean Energy in Marin. PG&E tried to stop it with about $50 million. They weren't happy to have competition, and they tried to take down politicians that were working to start this thing. Eventually, state laws were passed that reined in their lobbying in this regard, and we then got another CCA in Sonoma in 2014. Lancaster in the middle of Southern California, inland of Southern California, formed. Clean Power San Francisco, Peninsula Clean Energy in San Mateo County, and then in 2017, Silicon Valley Clean Energy launched. And after that, I spent a bunch of time, among others, in Southern California convincing folks, local electeds in the Los Angeles basin, the many cities there, also in San Diego, that they should get on board. And if you now look at the map of California and where these community choice energy agencies are operating, it's essentially the entire coast and then some parts of the interior. We did not have the good fortune, all of us, to think that it would be important 100 years ago when electricity was getting started. to form our own utilities. But there were exceptions. So for example, in a big swath of area around Stockton, they formed their own utilities. So they have a much better command now of both the energy supply and transmission. They do all of that. And also local cities, Palo Alto and Santa Clara, they own their own utilities. And if you move to Santa Clara and you find that for the same amount of electricity and gas you're using, you are paying on the order of a third less than you do, say, in Cupertino or San Jose. That, in fact, is a result of the very high transmission costs that we all pay from Pacific Gas and Electric. So the problem we're having generally is that our electricity costs are about as high as any place in the country. And PG&E now needs to be regulated better with regard to moving the electrons around that we need. Because of course, for the most part, we are getting energy that was generated many miles away. So the good news is local governments formed these agencies and said we can do better, and they now have. And the reason they have wasn't simply because they were a government structure paying with a lower overhead and cost. The difference really in cleaning up the energy supply was that these agencies contracted for new facilities, wind facilities, storage and solar, lots of that all over, geothermal resources, and then biogas and biomass. And in doing that, the state substantially reduced its carbon footprint because of these investments made by local government agencies called CCAs, like Silicon Valley Clean Energy. And okay, if you go to Lynbrook, perhaps you're a San Jose resident. San Jose got in the game a couple years after we did, and they also now run an agency. So bending the carbon curve down, right, is a process of looking at where our current emissions are and determining, okay, if we want to change this on a more aggressive, to be on a more aggressive path, how do we do that? And what is it that, what sort of policy things do we need to do to incent individual homeowners or businesses to change the energy they consume from carbon-based energy to fossil-free renewables, okay? So a little more on this. You might have heard that this spring we had a number of consecutive days where we actually generated more electricity than we could consume. And primarily that's from solar. And it's true, if you have a modestly cool day and there's not a huge load to cool buildings, many days in California are generating as much electricity as we need. But of course, the problem is that the sun doesn't always shine, right? When we get to 5 p.m. or so, depending on the season, the sun goes down, and the net of what is generated on our rooftops, less what has to be generated by some entity on the grid providing service, is called, it looks like this, and it's called the duck curve. So as we get into the middle of the day, the energy demand on the grid goes down, right? You get up in the morning, the sun is low, energy demand you can see is over in a modest area here, and then as we get into the middle of the day, with more and more solar capacity coming online, the energy demand is can be net negative. And then we get to the end of the day and people come home, they want to uh, make dinner, they want to start their clothes, they want to turn on lights to play games on fields and all of this. And so there's an aggressive ramp at the end of the day, and then it peaks out at, you know, sometime before we all go to bed, turn off the light, and now our energy usage is only modest again, but we have no generation. So this duck curve is a challenge for us. You can see that as time has gone on, we've had a deeper and deeper belly in the duck curve midday, and then we have a steeper ramp, therefore, at the end of the day. So that's one of the challenges with solar, which has caused us to invest in storage to bridge that time from the mid-afternoon to the end of the day, to make sure that our electricity, a lot of our electricity then can be used when our net demand is highest. Wind is another challenge for us. California, you've seen the windmills on Altamont Pass as you go through the East Bay to Stockton. So there are places where wind does reasonably well, but nobody does better on wind than in the Midwest. There are some particularly notably good places all the way in New Mexico, but in order to get to New Mexico, you need to build new transmission facilities. So we are short on wind, and that is a continuing challenge. The good news is if we do build those transmission lines, when the sun sets in, say, New Mexico, we're still generating here on the West Coast, and we can send them some of our excess power. So these are the kinds of things that ought to be encouraging us to build further transmission capacity. I'm going to skip over that one, I think. Yeah. There are a whole bunch of other things that we can do, which read on coming up with more innovative building materials. We have a substantial amount of carbon that can be made with less carbon when you transform limestone into cement to build buildings. You generate a lot of CO2. If you use new processes, you can use much less of that a carbon-heavy product. And in making cement, in making the concrete, the final product, you can actually sequester a fair amount. And that's what this picture is showing from a small company in Los Gatos. Transportation, I'm going to say very little about. It is about half of our emissions, and we are working very hard in the state, as you know, to move people toward electric vehicles. This would include trucks and things. It's important because if we don't fix that half of our carbon footprint, we can do as much as we want on buildings, but it doesn't work. I wanted to turn and talk about, since I know some of you are local anyway, some of the things that the nonprofit sector is working on to help with all these endeavors. The Rotary Club that I'm a part of recently funded a whole fleet of e-bikes for students at De Anza College, and their alternative in pedaling long distances, many of them are coming from parts of even East San Jose. Their alternative to sitting on I-280 with all of its traffic might be a bicycle. And so we have worked with De Anza College to enable them to loan these bikes for on a per academic quarter basis to students that for whom they'll ride these in place of driving. So that's one kind of benefit we can talk about. The single biggest appliance in the home that creates carbon, we talked about that 33%, and it's most of it is of natural gas burned by hot water heaters. And you think, well, gosh, isn't the furnace a bigger consumer? And the truth is, in our climate, it's not. And that is because the furnace is only on, what, half a year, perhaps. Whereas these water heaters are heating our water all the time, and it takes a lot of energy to heat water. So agencies like Silicon Valley Clean Energy and the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, both of which I sat on the boards of, have put a lot of money into incenting customers to replace their water heaters. And these things are honestly more expensive, and they will continue to be for a little while because installers aren't so familiar with how to do this, and there are some other fussy requirements that go to needing perhaps a panel upgrade or at least a connection to a panel. However, right, the technology is evolving quickly. There are now 120 volt models available that plug into ordinary existing wall sockets and will even share a circuit with lighting and other things. So one of the things we've been doing is in the nonprofit sector, taking advantage of the rebates offered by the likes of Silicon Valley Clean Energy. And the federal government also has a tax credit, and pitching homeowners on the idea that you could get a hot water heater for free. Hot water heaters don't last forever. So if yours is an older model, you'd be wise to take advantage of a rebate that lets you replace your water heater for only maybe $0, $1,500, something like that. And so the cost varies over time depending on the rebates available. But this is a heck of a deal. And we've, at our Rotary Club, helped a lot of homeowners make this conversion. We work with a nonprofit called Sunwork, and they recruit volunteers, including high school students. You have to be 16. And if you are 16 or 17, you can participate with the permission of parents. You get trained, and then you come up and help us on rooftops. So we do a whole number of solar projects for nonprofits in the area. We also have a water heater replacement program. So we work with any homeowner to help them get through the water heater replacement process. And we'll send a volunteer in to help assess and then find the right contractor. And then if it's Sunwork, we can also send a volunteer in to actually help work on the replacement. So these are some of the activities that we've been involved in locally. That's the end of the slides I have. I'd be happy to take questions.
Yeah, so we had actually a few from the chat. That were messaged to me, so I'll read them out loud. So one of the questions were, how do businesses incentivize, I guess just how do clean energy businesses, sorry, what does it say? I'm trying to paraphrase it too much. How are businesses incentivizing the commercial sector to also engage in clean energy resources?
Good question. So I mentioned that we were an energy provider for both businesses and homeowners, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, that is. So they get the same cleaner energy at lower prices as residential customers do. The biggest businesses actually can do their own thing. In California, there are some, they're called direct access customers, and they can do their own thing. We've tried to entice them with special arrangements, agreements that let our technical experts manage their electricity supply for them. But we're not always successful. So one of the newfangled pieces of tech that have come along in the last few years is something called a fuel cell. It sounds terrific. You know, you take natural gas and you put it through this process, and then magically you get electricity out of it. Well, it's true that there's no regular chemical combustion of the fuel cell, but it's very consumptive of lots and lots of natural gas. So people use these as a backup because of PG&E's lack of reliability. When the Apple campus was built in Cupertino, the big spaceship, they used a lot of this. They have lots of solar on the roof, but they also use this for when the sun isn't shining. Our carbon footprint went up very, very substantially in the year that those things got turned on. So the problem is they're still consuming natural gas. They're still putting out a lot of CO2. And yeah, they provide an alternate electricity supply. But from a carbon point of view, they're not a great thing. So we've had debates at the Air District, for example, to say, would we rather companies put these fuel cells in, hospitals, others put these fuel cells in to provide their backup electricity needs, or would we rather have them simply run a diesel generator? If you run a diesel generator, you're only doing it for test periods and when the electricity is really off. If you invest in fuel cells, you're liable to use them 24/7, 365 days a year. So most of us have become staunch opponents of the fuel cell thing. And okay, we'd love to find an alternative to PG&E brownouts, blackouts, and for now, diesel is probably the way to go. In the future, right, it'll be batteries, depending on how long you need to be up. Batteries remain a very expensive solution to the problem. So there's a few of the interesting things that I've come to learn about businesses and their energy supply. You might note our school district has worked very hard at providing its own local electricity supply, as many businesses have. So in our parking lots, you'll see lots of solar panels up. And if you do have some battery supply with that, you can live through a short blackout, right? The question is, okay, how many batteries are you going to buy for that, you know, as the clock ticks on the loss of power for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, you know, you need batteries proportional to that time, and they remain expensive. I think what's going to happen here in the near future is that batteries will get less expensive, but for all of us driving EVs around, there are now technical standards that have been developed that would allow us to provide our cars the ability to hook up to our homes and power our homes. The truth is, a car battery is a huge storage source. And if you're thoughtful about your use of electricity and not just turning on the air conditioner full blast and all these other things, your car might be able to power your home for 2-3 days. And that's probably quite long enough to survive most PG&E blackout events.
All right. Let me see if we have any other questions from Chat. Give me 1 second. I think this one's coming up. Yeah, so I think another question that came up was, how can your renewable energy be leveraged to improve energy access in, let's say, cities and developing countries?
Say that again.
Um, how can renewable energy be leveraged to improve energy access in developing countries and cities?
There are a whole number of organizations working not only to do that in developing countries, but in the United States in areas where you know they don't have the wealth that we do here. I know of a startup that is getting going to provide very low cost community solar for communities. It's transformational if you go to a place where there's no electricity and perhaps there's no clean water. Put up solar panels and then have a pump to pump that water and then put it through a reverse osmosis filter or some by some method, create enough energy, right, to press it through some kind of the water through some sort of filter, which then cleans it up and converts it to something that's potable. These are still in many places in the world are basic things that we don't have. Energy is also useful. So I'm familiar with this from Rotary. We have folks who have no regular access to doctors. So we fund trailers that go into the deepest places in the world that don't have the medical expertise. And these are solar powered trailers that have satellites that let folks who are doctors here in the United States and elsewhere provide medical services remotely. So there might be a nurse or a nurse practitioner, somebody with medical experience at the far end, sitting with a patient who really needs a doctor's advice. And this remote telemedicine thing is enabled by that access to energy. So these are things that, of course, change lives and communities when we're able to provide them economically.
All right, Arnav or Sagri, so you got any questions on your end?
I don't see any directed to me, so Sagar,
All
if there's
right,
any to you,
perfect.
then
Me neither.
All right,
all
perfect.
right,
Then that's it for then today. So yeah, you
Good.
can end it off, Arnav.
all right. I think Calvin cut out for, something froze on my end, but thank you so much for coming, Mr. Sinks. I think it was really informative, and we'll be sure to get that recording out to our international audience. So once again, everyone, like, please send your thank yous in the chat for Mr. Sinks, and yeah, thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
If anybody wants to contact me, my email is simply my first last name @gmail. So rodsinks@gmail.com.